So hello, everybody. My name is Kezia Rust. I'm the Executive Director of the Center for Affordable Housing Finance in Africa, and also part of the Secretariat for, oops, there we go. How about that? For the African Union for Housing Finance. And I'm here with my colleague, Thandiwe Dlamini, who is the head of the AUHF Secretariat. Hello, Thandiwe. You can say hello.
Thank you, Kezia. Hi, everyone. Kezia has already introduced me. Thank you so much for joining us. We're looking forward to the conversation and more collaboration. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you. And now we're here to hear a discussion between Jobomax and Kado Partners. So Robert Hornsby from Jobomax and John Block and Frank Chucado from Kado Partners to tell us really about what's been happening with their businesses and how they've brought them together. Do you each want to just quickly introduce yourselves so that the audience knows who we're all talking to? Robert, start with you.
Robert Hornsby, the co-founder and CEO of Jobomax, and I'm excited to be here having this conversation with you all.
John?
Yep, John Block. I'm with Kado Partners in Cameroon. I will be the CIO of Jobo Africa. I'll let Frank introduce himself.
Hello, everyone. I'm Frank Chucado from Kado Partners. I'm currently based in Cameroon, being the boots on the ground. I co-founded Kado Partners with John, and really excited. And thanks to everyone for joining.
I'm really so happy that we're having this discussion. Both Jobomax and Kado Partners have been members of the African Union for Housing Finance since about 2018, 2019. Can I say that this is where you met? Is that possible?
Absolutely.
There we go. So we've got a very nice relationship story. And I wonder if you might start with that, actually. Tell us a little bit about your origin story as two individual companies coming together. Give us a little bit of background. Who would like to start with that one first?
I'll jump in and then I'll hand it off to John and Frank. The Jobomax origin story is in a lot of ways it's a story about curiosity, and it is. I say that because I started this business with two partners, and it was largely their curiosity that landed us in this business. One of my partners, Jonathan Halloran, was a friend of mine from when we served in the Peace Corps together in Cote d'Ivoire in the early 90s. The other partner, Mamadi Doumbouya, I met here in Philadelphia several years after I left Peace Corps. Mamadi was from Guinea. Mamadi's curiosity as a young man, after he met growing up in West Africa, he met a Peace Corps volunteer who encouraged him to look beyond the region, and that's how he ended up in the U.S. in the late 60s, and built a family and a career here, and that's how he ended up in Philadelphia. That's how I met him. Jonathan's curiosity was provoked by walking past homes under development in his town, Tabou in Cote d'Ivoire, where he did his Peace Corps service, and he would see projects get started, and then a year would go by, 2 years would go by, and very little progress would be made. So he puzzled over that problem, ended up writing a business plan when he was in business school. Mamadi, as he got into his later years here in Philadelphia, he did what many people in the diaspora do, which is start thinking about investing back home and building a home to go back to retire to. And so he, when we started working together, he had been trying to build a home in Guinea for close to 10 years and had encountered all sorts of frustrations in that process. But it was really our collective curiosity about this housing problem that got us together, and we went out and talked to more people in the diaspora and found out that there's a real problem here for people who have the means to invest back home. They want to invest back home. They have trouble finding people or companies they can trust to manage a project for them, and that's the market opportunity that we saw at the outset. Being curious about the sector and wanting to learn more, we constantly are looking for opportunities to connect with other people working in the space. It's how we ended up at the Abuja housing show back in 2018, which is where I walked into a breakfast that AUHF was hosting, and then through AUHF got to know some of the other members, including Kado Partners. And that is probably a good stopping point for me to hand off and let you guys talk about your origin story.
Sure. Yeah, I'll take it and then pass it to Frank. So yeah, from the Kado Partners side, my background specifically has primarily been within the real estate private equity realm and investment banking. I've worked at a lot of the larger real estate companies here in the U.S., all asset classes. Frank and I actually originally met in business school. He's originally from Cameroon, and I'll let him share his story in a second. But we started talking with a few people, gosh, this goes back to 2017, 2018, that were investing in various opportunities on the continent. And we spent a lot of time running market studies and focus groups, which I guess you could say, similar to you, Bob, came out of curiosity. But long story short, we felt that there was the most potential, at least given our skill sets, in the residential sector. We acquired a multifamily asset about 3 years ago in Bastos, near city center Yaoundé. We also just finished a single family residential project community for our clients about 20 minutes north of the city in Yaoundé, called Tinga Village. But before I go any further and kind of round out the story, I'll pass it to you, Frank, to maybe share a little bit about your background and perspective on the business.
Thanks, Sean. I think you covered the main points of our story. So one thing that I could just maybe add is that I was born and raised in Cameroon, so moved to the US at the age of 16, joined the business school where I met John, and we were part of a small program, the real estate program, where we got to maybe dive a little bit deeper into finance and how it relates to real estate. And that's where I started just sharing my personal experience, coming from a much less developed country as, Cameroon, and being, studying real estate at a very high level in the US and working on these like huge commercial projects. So that's where John and I just started talking about the various opportunities in Africa and how we can kind of use our knowledge. After that, we went out to our respective, followed our respective journeys, and still kept in touch. Me personally, most recently, I was in the mortgage industry, working I was in the mortgage industry, and then eventually we decided that it was probably time to start, conceptualizing some of those ideas that we had. And one thing after another, they finally decided to leave my job in the US and move back to the country to be the boots on the ground and be able to kind of grow. And ultimately, through AUHF, we met Bob, and which is why we're here now to, continue the rest of the story.
Yeah, and I'll just kind of jump in there on the AUHF side. So yeah, as Bob mentioned, we met the Jobomax team. I think, Bob, it was about 4 years ago in an AUHF meeting. So similar to Bob, thanks Kessia and Thandaway and the AUHF team for playing a role in that. Over the years, we've developed a good relationship with Bob. Initially, it started just connecting and sharing stories with each other, but we've more recently utilized some of Jobomax's technology and their financing vehicles. Really, up to this point, as I mentioned, we've been split across single family housing, similar to Jobomax, but also the larger scale multifamily projects. And then about a year ago, Bob and I and Frank met in Philadelphia, and we started to talk about expanding and having the Jobomax team expand with us into Cameroon and do a new investment on the single family housing side. The conversation actually evolved into us talking about doing something bigger together on the continent with our complementary skill sets and experience, we saw a lot of potential doing something together. So I'm sure we'll get into that, but we're really excited to come together and merging our companies. And again, thank you again to the AUHF team for playing a role in that process.
Thank you. Very happy to hear that we did, and that's great. I mean, you guys could be competitors, but you've decided instead that you're merging. So tell me a little bit about that. Maybe Bob, if you can address that. So why did you decide, in fact, instead of being curious about one another, but operating in your respective spaces, what is it that drove you and gave you the idea to go ahead with a merger? And how did that work?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked this question, Keisha. You know, we have said for a long time. I mean, I enjoy talking to people that are doing business in this space. Housing in sub-Saharan Africa is a challenge that some of the best minds in the world have puzzled over for decades, and it remains a tricky problem that nobody has really completely cracked, right? And so anytime I come across people that are working in the space, I'm curious to know what's motivating them and what they've learned, where they're having successes, where they're having challenges. And everyone I've met in the space, and many of whom are I recognize on this as participants on this call, I've had this conversation with many people. This problem is so big, and the market is so vast, and the capacity of any given developer to address that problem and make a dent in that problem is so limited that it's, I think, silly for us to look at each other as competitors when what we really have to offer each other is what we've learned, where we've made mistakes, where we see opportunities to grow. We can learn from each other in that regard and grow the market and attract more capital into the market by working together than we can by getting worried about competition. There is more than enough business in this space for all of us and more. Like if every builder that's out there right now doing something in sub-Saharan Africa tripled their output tomorrow, we'd still be a drop in the bucket of what needs to happen.
Yeah.
When John and Frank started talking to me about they were, wanting to raise money to go buy another piece of land in Cameroon and how we might sort of participate in that on a project basis, my thought was like, every time I go out to raise $1 million, inevitably somebody tells me, it's not much harder to raise 20 million or 100 million than it is to raise 1 million. And that's sort of how we started talking seriously about what it would mean to go out and grow an organization together and raise capital together. Because if you can raise larger pools of capital and then spend your time investing it and growing, instead of spending your time going out every 18 months and chasing another $1 million here and there, all of a sudden you're on a path to scaling and having some real impact in the space. So I digress a little bit, but for me, we should all be collaborating, whether we're merging or not. We can't merge with everybody, but the opportunity and the need in this sector is for collaboration, not competition. So.
Yeah, for real. I mean, I'm so interested in, because what you're talking about is that the scale opportunity is not linear. It's like exponential, actually, right? From 1 million to 20 or 100 or whatever. So talk a little bit about the numbers. What are the two companies? What did you bring in? And then together, how is this whole greater than the sum of the parts?
Sure. So Jobomax has been building since 2014. We started in Guinea. We have expanded to Sierra Leone and Ghana. How we do our business is a little bit different depending on which market we're talking about. In Guinea and Sierra Leone, it's greenfield development, doing everything from scratch, from the ground up. In Ghana, we bought into a master plan community. All told, we've done about 125 homes, I guess, in Guinea and Sierra Leone. We're about to break ground in Ghana. One of and those are homes mostly, but not exclusively, for the diaspora. We do sales to local buyers as well. Most of our sales have been financed, and we'll talk a little bit. I think John has some stuff to talk about, to say about the financing platforms that we use. But this is like another case of starting one business on the continent and realizing that all the infrastructure to support that business doesn't exist yet. And so then you have to go build some of the infrastructure to support the business that you wanted to build in the first place. So we built financing companies to be able to finance our buyers. To date, I think we've pushed probably more than $6 million of financing to home buyers in the diaspora to be able to make investments back home. And so yeah, that's our best year was 2023 with almost $2.5 million of revenue. And 2024 was kind of tough with COVID stimulus going away and inflation starting to hit people. So we didn't do quite as well in 2024, but 2025 looks to be on track to be another good year, particularly with the opportunities that we see in Cameroon through this merger. And John, I'll let you talk about Kado numbers, or Frank, whichever one of you guys want.
Yeah, I can jump in here. Yeah, why merge versus staying as competitors and helping each other? I think from when we take a step back, what Bob, Frank, and I think is that we have unique experiences and backgrounds that can add value to each other. And obviously, Kado Partners is giving Jobomax access into Cameroon, and we have experience building single family housing. Our clientele is very similar to Jobomax's, so that bodes well. But the second reason, which I think is a huge potential growth opportunity for both of us, comes from our background managing larger scale residential projects. And we're really looking at growing the property management business, selling that service to our buyers, which is a nice amenity, especially when you only visit a few times a year for the diaspora community specifically. But the last reason, which for the merger, which I think is really important, is brand. In a market where skepticism is high, many people have been burned trying to build or buy a home in Africa, as Bob mentioned earlier. We think that by joining forces with Jobomax, leveraging our skill sets and the track record, collectively we're about 140 homes and 115 financings. We think that amplifies our ability to streamline fundraising efforts, as Bob mentioned. It also enhances our ability to cross-sell to clients, many of these individuals know each other, many of these diaspora communities know each other. It also allows us to spend time and money and invest in technology and shared resources where we otherwise wouldn't be able to. So we're really excited to come together. We're looking to grow into another 4 or 5 markets, which we can talk about, kind of the plans on how we plan to grow into those markets, getting us to 8 or 9 countries. But we are currently fundraising a seed equity round, and again, I'm sure we'll talk about that as well on the call. But that'll help facilitate the merger and allow us to keep growing this year in 2025, with the goal of raising an institutional round later this year. And if you do have any interest in your qualified investor, of course, we'd love to hear from you. But Frank, I don't know if there's anything else that you want to add before I pass it back to Kesia.
No, I think you and Bob just kind of covered all the basic reasons why we decided to join. And it was just to create these synergies, as Bob mentioned. Like the task ahead is very massive and complex and difficult. So it's only natural to join forces and continue to keep each other balanced, as we continue to navigate.
Just a quick question still on this. Is it too early days to answer this, but how are your investors responding right now? Have they raised their eyebrows? Are they talking to you? What's the time frame involved in this?
Yeah, so this is something, I mean, John has been socializing this with his investors, I think a little bit longer than I have, but we had an investor meeting in January. We try to do an annual meeting, and we sort of reported out on what the first 10 years of business had looked like, what the challenges were in 2024, what the opportunities are in 2025, and we talked about this merger and capital raise. And people are excited on the Jobomax side. They, our earliest investors have been invested in this business for 10 years. And so they've followed this story. They've seen us, fight through Ebola and fight through COVID and fight through coups and tricky elections and all this kind of stuff. And so to see this path opening up to having more exposure across more countries and partnering with an accomplished team like the guys at Kado, it's been a pretty exciting thing for our investors, some of whom are participating in this investment round that we're doing now. So on our end, I can say enthusiastic.
So the introductions to the family went well.
Yes.
Okay, well, that's very good. Frank, can you talk a little bit more about the context and I guess targeting that your response to how Jobo Africa now is going to respond to that context? What are some of the major issues that you're facing across the continent and in the countries that you've worked at? And what are the key targets for your methodology as you engage in these markets?
Thanks, Kesia. As we talked about the challenges that we face, I like to address this topic and from the perspective of an African citizen, which I am, and also a member of the African diaspora.
Mm-hmm.
And we can, bucket the major challenges that we face on the three major categories. The first one being the supply of housing. And as Bob mentioned, I think he said it very, very wisely, that if we were to, combine all the major developers in sub-Saharan Africa and maybe triple our output, we still wouldn't be able to kind of meet the demand. And it's because we currently have a housing unit backlog that we estimate at about 50 million units. So as of today, if we wanted to, I guess bring the demand up to speed to balance, we will need to build about 50 million homes, which is not easy to do. And then you add that to a rapidly growing population. I believe statistically, the African population is currently at about 1 billion and is expected to double by 2050. And also another key fact is the high urbanization rate that we're currently experiencing in Africa, because you have most people moving into the city and which is, further creating this big housing deficiency, which, some would call like a crisis. And so in sum, we have this huge demand and big undersupply of housing that, is the major challenge that we need to face, especially that for people, whether living locally or abroad, you want to find a housing or a piece of land with clean title. And that's very difficult to do right now. And second to that is the financing issue that I think many of us, again, both locally and abroad, face, because the financing in housing, it's practically non-existent in Africa. And it is especially true in the countries that we're currently operating. I think there's a statistic of the mortgage market saturation in Africa, which is, the total mortgages, per GDP is 1%. And you compare that to, more developed countries like North America or Europe, that is about closer to 20%. It's becoming very clear that, someone could have a piece of land, but not be able to finance it through a mortgage, or, maybe you have access to financing, but, finding a land is difficult. And with that, the third major challenge is trust. And I think John mentioned that there's a lot of skepticism in our industry. And we have many clients that come to us with sad stories. And I think personally, I've heard many from direct family members. I have personal experience of people just of having their funds mismanaged locally through maybe inexperienced developers, which will eventually increase construction costs, through the construction from abroad, and the home was not built at all or wasn't built the way they wanted. So when you mix that up, it creates three major complexities that we want to be able to solve. And that is why our mission is really to provide a different experience to our clients, one that's transparent, efficient, and convenient. We generally start with a 62-step land title process to make sure that the land that the client is acquiring is clean, the title is clean, and then also with financing opportunities that will help them be able to build their homes within 6 months versus maybe 4 years if they were to build it on their own. And added to that, we through our technologies that is more innovative, I would say, than many others in the continent. We get the clients involved through the construction process with updates that are sent regularly. We know they are part of the discussions and the decision making. So that makes our goal is to provide a very stress-free experience, and that will help overcome these challenges even when we start scaling up. And as we like to say at Jobo Africa, we build homes, but we sell trust, and you can see that through the way that we operate.
That's cool. A quick question, and then John, I want to jump to you to talk first about the finance, and then we'll go to the house construction, because that caught my attention with what Frank was saying just now. But the diaspora clients that you work with, the two of you are based in the States. Do you work with people from the diaspora all over the world, or just from America?
I can say from the Jobomax side of things, and I think this is true of Kado as well. It will be true of Jobo Africa going forward. We deal with members of the diaspora all around the world. It makes it challenging to figure out what's the right time to call somebody in Australia, for example. But we have customers.
The least of your worries.
We have customers in Australia and Europe and North America. So mostly, really for and John will talk a little bit more about the financing side of things. But given that most of our diaspora buyers will apply for financing, and given that the two financing organizations that we work with like to deal with dollar-denominated instruments, for us to be able to put together financing contracts that will work and where we can manage the risk of the underwriting risk of those contracts, it has been important for us to work with people who have income in some OECD currency where the fluctuation against the dollar is not quite as dramatic as you get with some African currencies. We do want to expand that financing offering into the local market, and we are talking to financial institutions and others, banks and other types of institutions about opening that up. But
Okay. I mean, let's ask John about that, because that's exactly why I asked that question, is that if you've got people all over the place, how are you going to find someone to finance them? How does the housing finance program work?
Yeah, happy to chime in here. And I think it's important to give the full story, to kind of walk you through the conditions on the ground, our experience with home mortgages, I know we've touched on it a little bit in the countries we operate, where we are today, currently in our financing vehicles, and then where we want to be in the future, and what we're looking to do there as well. So historically, the sad reality is that most local banks will require salaries to flow through their balance sheet in order to provide home loans. And again, this is in the countries we operate. Not every country in Africa is the same. But the problem is that community in a community where people often don't deposit those salaries into the bank for a variety of reasons, and for the diaspora, to your point, Kesia, that puts money into banks in Europe, North America, or Australia, it's often not realistic to put everything into a local bank every month. So for this reason, it's been our experience that clients have a very difficult time finding a mortgage. And even when they are able to secure financing locally, it's typically shorter term, 2 to 7 years, at significantly higher interest rates, typically 12%, well above 12%. So really, out of lack of options, we've been forced to create the financing vehicles that are specifically designed for the diaspora in this situation, where we collect a 30% deposit from the buyer up front. We start before starting construction. The 70% financing for the balance is then repaid over 10 years at a 12% interest. We do hold title until the financing is repaid. There's various reasons for that, which protects our position, but it's been very successful. Candidly, it's a big reason for many of our sales. About 80% of home sales utilize some portion of financing that we generate. Since 2017, Bob can chime in here if the statistics are off, but we've raised about $6 million in financing across the two vehicles with quarterly distributions. We've done about 115 financings, very low default rate with no investor capital lost in every default. Of course, have to caveat that past performance isn't a reflection of future returns. But all that said, while we haven't been able to structure mortgages with local banks and lending institutions, to Bob's point, we are in the throes of trying to create a financing solution with a few local entities. So fingers crossed, in the future, we'd love to diversify our lending options. And that gets me to the last point, which I think you're also insinuating. For institutions that are interested in investing in our financing vehicles, or even working with us to structure one, we do believe that the risk-adjusted returns are attractive. So if you're a bank or an NGO or financing entity and you're qualified, we'd love to hear from you and see if we can figure out a way to structure financing that makes sense for you. Again, we can share more in detail when we connect directly. But Bob, is there anything that you'd like to add, or anything I missed on the financing side?
Just one thing about the funds flows, John. It is true that we've pushed out about $6 million in financing to home buyers. The money, the investor capital that has come into those financing entities is like between 3.5 and 4 million. And the difference between what the financing we've been able to provide and the investment capital that we've brought in is the recycling of capital from people paying down their home financing.
Wow, sure.
So we are generating now with the first financing entity that Jobomax helped set up. That's a separate entity now, US Africa Housing Finance, run by a guy that was one of our early investors. But I think I'm going to say that the US Africa Housing Finance alone is generating close to $500,000 of recycled capital to be put back into housing finance. And that's the beauty of this system, and the beauty of getting to a place where you have some real scale, is that if you've got a portfolio of housing finance that's 30 million instead of 3.5 million, then you're recycling a lot of capital, and that becomes just an engine for providing more and more financing. That's capital that's coming directly from people in the diaspora. They're paying off their house, and in the course of doing that, they're making more capital available for other people to finance their home. So
10 years is shorter than a 20-year mortgage, but it's a long time. That's a long time to be connected. Is that why you are offering property management services? Did I hear you say that before?
Yeah, so this is one of the things that Kado, I mean, when we talk about what do we gain from a merger, and who brings what to the table, figuring out property management for absentee owners has been has been a tricky puzzle for us on the Jobomax side. Kado, on the other hand, sort of like that's what they did first, because they set up this multi-story, multi-family unit first, and we're sort of like managing that property, and then they took those lessons to do with their single family development as well. So so we're excited about what they bring to the table in terms of property management. John has mentioned some of the technology we use. There's a platform called Cola that we use for payments for our buyers. And that's the tool that they use to manage, you know, to be able to see daily updates from the construction site. But also Cola is implementing now a service platform that allows the property owners to pay their water bill or engage somebody for landscaping services, that kind of thing. And then the next iteration of that will be a full-blown property management platform that can manage short-term rental, long-term rental, all that kind of stuff.
I mean, if you crack that, there's going to be a lot of demand for that as a service. Lots, I think, and beyond the houses you build. But I know that's for another conversation and future mergers and partnerships and
Right.
so on. Okay, tell me a little bit about, Bob, just if you could talk about standards in construction, what it is that you're delivering in the course of your developments, and then maybe Frank to add the plans in Cameroon in particular going forward.
Yeah, I will I'll talk about standards in sort of three buckets. They're not the only issues related to standards, but we're, you know, we have limited time here. For us, it really starts with what is the viability of the structure that you're putting up, and is it going to be something that will last not just 10 years, but 50 years or more, right? You know, the irony is that we're building homes in West Africa right now to like 50, 100-year lifespan standards because we're building out of materials that are durable. That's a big contrast to all the homes that are going up around me here in Philadelphia with 2x4s and vinyl siding. Those are not 100-year homes, you know. And so but anyhow,
Lovely trust in the future.
right. But so one of the first things that we really dug in aggressively on with respect to standards was concrete mixture, because when you look at stories about what goes wrong with construction in sub-Saharan Africa, and you see these headlines about this building that fell down just out of the blue, just fell down. Well, they don't fall down out of the blue. They fall down because people are taking shortcuts on the structural elements. Maybe they're not using enough cement. Maybe they're using too much water. But basically, that's sort of like the first place we started on really enforcing standards was testing every concrete batch, making sure that your concrete mixture is going to cure in a way that's going to give you the compression strength that you need for that kind of structure. The next area where we've done a lot of work is with job site safety. It is, you know, we sadly or in a lot of the places where we work, there is not a culture of job site safety. There is not a culture of concern for the well-being of laborers in general, the value of human life. When it comes to enforcing those kinds of safety standards, is just it's not what it is in some other markets, and to us, that's not an acceptable proposition. To us, the value of the life of the guy who's digging the septic tank in Guinea is no less important than the value of my life or any other human life. And so we do a lot of work to enforce safety standards, fall protection in particular, but also safety around electricity. We have had in I don't know how many 100,000 hours of work time, but we've had one lost time accident so far, and I should touch wood because it's, you know, you never know when the next one's around the corner, but we really work hard with our team and with our subcontractors to put those standards in place. And then finally, the other piece I'll talk about is with respect to finishes. Tile, paint, caulk around your bathroom fixtures, and those kinds of things. There tends to be a gap. People who have lived in say North America or Europe for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, going back to West Africa and walking into a property that was built by local builders, there's often a gap between their expectations with respect to what finishes are going to look like and what finishes actually end up looking like. And some of that's just simple stuff like making things square that are supposed to be square, or plumb that are supposed to be plumb, and keeping putting the right amount of caulk around your bathroom fixtures, those kinds of things. So
and durability too. So because these are
sure.
properties that won't be necessarily occupied by their owners on day one, that you want to have a durability.
Yeah, and durability, I mean, yeah, I mean, we're not using in general finishes that are just going to fall apart as soon as we walk out the door. We do offer a couple different trims where you can buy a luxe version that has more expensive materials, but the real durability concern is on the core and shell, right? The structural elements, the roof, that kind of stuff. Those things, of course, we pay a lot of attention to. Finishes, yes, durability matters, but the thing that people respond to is how they look. What is the appearance of this thing? Is this light switch straight on the wall? Those kinds of things. So the interesting thing is that there is no shortage. Like the labor force in this part of the world is fully capable of delivering finishes at a level that is acceptable to international standards. The problem is people don't ask for it enough. People accept sort of the status quo instead of saying, hey, you could do better. And we find that when we engage with craftspeople, with artisans who are doing a certain kind of work, and we say, look, you can do better here, and here's how you can do better, there's one of two things will happen. They'll either say, you know what, I've always been doing it this way. I've always done it this way, and it's always been good enough, so I'm not going to change for you. Well, you know, we know that those are not the kinds of people we can work with. There's other people, though, that will say, you know what, nobody has ever told me that before, and I can see why this is better to do it this way. It doesn't really cost, it doesn't even cost more to do it better most of the time. It just means it just requires paying attention. And so people have come to us after the fact and said, you know, there's one guy, we tell a story about the guy who will take his family to see the tile job he did in one of our houses because he's so proud of the job that we made him tear up and go back and do again, because it wasn't up to standards. So anyhow, those are sort of the three big areas where we focus on standards.
I can see that this issue of trust is quite significant. And as you say, that you were two companies, now you're one company and you're building a brand. And that brand you're building is in the countries in which you're operating, but also in the wider diaspora. These are very important things to consider. But also such a relief for your buyers, because it is a risky thing to invest in something you can't see. So no,
Yes,
that's
Keith,
cool.
and if I could add just one more point to what Bob was just elaborating on is that Jobo Africa is a one-of-a-kind vertically integrated platform. And we specifically chose to structure ourselves that way, to allow us to continue to preserve the highest standards of, construction and, even services that we want to deliver to our client. So we have a full range of services that go from providing financing, construction management, property management, asset management, even sales and IT, compared to our peers that don't offer financing or even provide the level of transparency that we offer. So we want to be a one-stop shop for their solution. And in that way, we will continue to maintain this high level of capabilities that, Bob mentioned is found within, our local resources, but just have to be able to guide our clients, throughout this process.
So let me ask you a little bit about the wider applicability of what you guys are trying to do. There's a question in the chat where someone is asking what other countries might you consider partnerships in. I'll leave that to you to respond in writing. But I'm interested in the opportunity for other forms of housing that might be different than what you're delivering right now for the diaspora. For example, employer housing. Another example could be, I don't know, have you thought about student housing? Have you thought about working with local level contractors that might be working in lower income ranges? Start with the employer housing, but if you can comment on the others, that would be great. Frank, do you want to start?
Sure. And this is strategically speaking, this is one question I love to defer to John or Bob because
Fair enough.
I'm boots on the ground and also very involved in our strategy. But I think they're on more of the wider vision of talking about which other country to tap into next. Or are we going to go into student housing or different type of housing? So, thanks for picking on me, but I would love to defer this question to
Sorry
Bob
about
or
that.
No, that's good.
I can jump in. I've had some of these conversations recently, and these are conversations that we've had in the past. We are in a part of the world where there's a lot of mining activity. So there are mining companies that have housing needs for their workers. We have talked to mobile phone companies and banks and others who are looking for opportunities to do something to support housing opportunities for their workers. And so, yes, those kinds of projects are interesting to us. I will say that I'm trying not to offend anyone here, but what I have learned from the experiences that I've had, and my experiences may be different from others, but when I talk to someone who right out of the gate says that they are going to build 10,000 homes or 20,000 homes or 5,000 homes even, in my experience, that tends to be a conversation that goes on and on and on for a long time and nothing ever gets built. When I have conversations with people that say, I want to get to 20,000 homes or whatever the number is, but what I want to do first is I want to build 100 or I want to build 200. Those people are going to get something done. And those are the kinds of organizations I like to work with because they have a realistic sense of what you should do to get something started, learn the lessons you're going to learn, and then figure out how to scale it. There are, in my opinion, far too many people out there saying that they're just going to go out and build tens of thousands of homes right off the bat because they're looking for a good headline in the news or whatever they're looking for. And those, from what I've seen, few of those projects have enough planning behind them to actually get off the ground. So yes, we're interested in that kind of work. No, don't call me if what you want is 10,000 houses tomorrow because I'm not your guy. The other thing I'll say that
What
has
if I'm a builder that like has only ever done 20 houses at a time? And I think that if I work with you, then maybe I'll be able to do 50.
sure. Yeah, I
Okay.
mean, we can, yeah.
I mean,
That
I think that's a better target market actually, because I think that that's where a whole lot of activity is on the supply side. It's just not recognized, or
sure,
it doesn't have the capital, and you could be an interesting bridge into that.
absolutely. And look, if you are a quality builder, we want to talk to you because we're not looking to recreate the wheel anywhere we go. All of our work is done through subcontract using local subcontractors with local labor and local management. We want for, we see our role not only as sort of providing this service to the diaspora, but also as making investments into the housing market ecosystem in the region that are going to improve the quality across the board. And you do that through working through local subcontractors, training them, holding them to standards, and making it possible for them to make a good living doing good work. And so absolutely,
Totally.
that's something we're interested in. Yeah.
Bob, there's the question that just came through from Lou Schulman, and he's asking if you're using any energy certifications like Edge,
So
or I guess.
we've talked to the people at Edge, and at the risk of how shall I say this delicately? We believe that it is important to build in a way that that is attentive to the reality of the climate challenge that is affecting coastal communities like the ones that we build in, right? So this is why we look for opportunities to use less cement in what we're building. It's why we look for opportunities to move to enhanced earth block. It's why we study prevailing wind patterns and try to orient our houses in a way that they can benefit from prevailing winds and have some passive cooling, so you're not trying to keep climate control inside a house, 24/7, 365 in a humid tropical climate where electricity service is not great, right? So we are on board with the philosophical underpinnings of programs like Edge. We have not seen a way to tap into those programs that is affordable for us. At the end of the day, we have to pay people to do work, we have to pay subcontractors to do work, we have to buy materials, we have to pay taxes. And the way that certifications are priced for that program, at least the last time we talked to their consultants,
Yeah.
it's sort of like pay a bunch of money now and all sorts of things will open up for you. Well, maybe, but we haven't seen a way to really
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, I think we've seen that in affordable housing, there is a barrier there.
Yeah.
We've got 4 minutes left. So I want to talk a little bit about the future and challenges. And John, maybe you can respond to this one. But we've been talking about trust and accountability. You've got your individual track records. You're now bringing those together into a collective track record. And you want to grow exponentially, as we've heard, but with care. But what are the challenges that you foresee in that?
Yeah, I think, and this kind of answers your question, Casio, with regard to how we plan on expanding. As I mentioned, we're currently in 4 countries. We want to be in another 4 or 5, and we need to be very thoughtful about how we expand. And the 2 main challenges that we're focused on is one, finding the right partners to expand with. It's not easy, and as Bob mentioned, we're focused on finding partners that have actually built in the country, that know the supply chain, know the market challenges. We have a bias for working with groups that have been active building. And, of course, it's important to do your homework and vet the partner up front to make sure there's alignment of interest. But generally speaking, the partners would also ideally have some sort of connections to sales pipelines and potentially the diaspora as well, in generating new leads. The other big challenge, which you're implying, that we're going to run into as we grow, which is maintaining quality and reducing costs. We also need to innovate as we continue to build more homes, and it's not easy when you're adding people to the equation. But I think one of the main benefits of having a bigger platform with shared resources at the corporate level, particularly with engineering, is that you can push through best practices on building systems and materials, as Bob just mentioned, like the compressed earth block, as well as construction management to make sure your material management rooms are being monitored appropriately. But again, in summary, our focus is, as we grow, is adding the right partners and maintaining or improving quality along the way. Frank is going to be heavily focused on that in the day-to-day on the operations side. So I guess I'll let Frank chime in if you have anything to add as relates to things that we need to be focused on as we grow into new markets.
Yes, John, and you pointed out one big challenge that I usually think of as we continue to grow is, how to maintain standards of quality while reducing cost. How do you continue to innovate and preserve the culture within the company, as you're adding more people. I mean, these are challenges that would evolve, and then we'll maybe continue to think of creative ideas. But I believe Jobo Africa is well positioned for these, especially at the executive level. Having the right mindset of innovating, leveraging our technologies, and as John mentioned, joining forces with like local experts to help reach our goals. So I'm not worried about these, but definitely challenges will come with different facets, but we'll continue to address it with that same mindset that we have, is working with the best to preserve our high standards, and joining forces with local teams that will help us reduce costs, and also maybe be flexible about the cultural needs that different clients will have based on their countries. That's one important part also that comes with joining forces with like local experts that can kind of point out to some the gray areas, right, that are usually different from one country to another.
Great, thank you. So I've got two little questions I'm going to ask quickly. Bob, forgive the presumption, but I'm going to guess that as a graduate of Peace Corps, you'd be a bit frustrated by the what's going on in the aid environment at the moment with USAID. And I wonder, and maybe I'm wrong, but I'm certainly very frustrated. I would love to hear, is this going to have any impact on you guys at all?
Well, look, we along the way, we have made application to various kinds of development finance from different organizations, both based in the U.S. and outside the U.S. We don't rely on any of that financing because they haven't given it to us, and so we're not losing anything.
So that's a weird kind of luck.
Right. I mean, we're not losing anything right away. Look, are there things to criticize about development finance? Forget USAID. Let's talk about development finance in general. Are there things that to criticize about how that's deployed? Absolutely. Could it be more efficient? Absolutely. Are you going to fix it by burning everything down?
No.
I guess we'll find out, but so it's frustrating to see people approaching this in what appears to be just sort of a gleeful destruction mode rather than a really sort of collaborative, let's figure out how to make this work better. That's frustrating.
You're pointing out something so interesting here, because on the flip side, you're facilitating capital to come through.
Here's the thing, there's lots of good reasons for countries with resources to exert soft power through supporting development around the world. There's it doesn't take a rocket scientist to know that that's true. However, if you know this because you know the numbers, you stack up all the development finance that goes into sub-Saharan Africa from every development finance institution, and stack on top of that all the foreign direct investment that comes from foreign institutions, foreign companies that are investing in sub-Saharan Africa. And that, if you stack it all up, it's like this. And then you look at remittances that are like this, right?
Exactly.
And so we believe that if you can, like, so the people in the diaspora are sending money home to support the economies in their home countries. They're doing it in massive numbers, much bigger than any aid that's going to go away. And our belief is that most of that money is intended for real estate projects, whether it actually ends up there or not. That's where people want it to go.
Okay.
B, a lot of that money is getting sucked up by transfer fees and bad exchange rates because people are sending money over $2,000, $3,000 at a time, instead of figuring out ways to bundle large transfers into US dollar accounts and minimize transfer costs. So, and this is one of the ways that we save our buyers money that we don't even talk about that much because it's kind of hard to explain. But when we send over $50,000 to fund construction projects and it goes into our US dollar account and our team gets a favorable exchange rate, well, that cost a minuscule amount in terms of transfer fees. Whereas if you're sending $2,000 to your brother to build a home, maybe you're paying 8%, maybe you're paying 10%, whatever. You're losing money that way. So, so there's the there's the scale of the remittances coming in, and the fact that much of that is designated to this sector, and the fact that we're operating in an environment of really low trust, right? People, despite the trust problems, are still sending massive amounts of money over there. And so if we can be part of an ecosystem that says, hey, look, there is a trusted partner for making these kinds of investments back home. You can send your money and you don't have to sort of go down to Western Union and cobble it together. You can just send it by Zelle to a bank here in the US, or you can send it by Wise if you live in Europe. And like, we make it easy for people, make sure they know who they're dealing with, and that the people they're dealing with can be trusted to do the job they said they were going to do. We believe that will open up even more remittances to a degree that can absolutely swamp the effect of whatever aid is going to go away. Do I think all aid should go away? Absolutely not. I think there are things that can, there's lots of good work to be done there. My wife has had a career in global public health and keeping neglected tropical diseases at bay is something that that needs support from all.
Yeah, you don't want to mess around with that.
No, otherwise you get people showing up in airplanes with Marburg or Ebola or whatever the hemorrhagic fever du jour is that they haven't even named yet. So like, yes, there should be aid, but from our perspective, if we can continue building trust in the community, and showing people that there is a platform for making these investments back home, and that your interests will be taken care of, we think there's a lot more remittance money out there that's just standing on the sidelines waiting for opportunities. So.
Totally. And I really like the way in which you're connecting. It's sort of like you're connecting all of the links in the value chain and working with local level suppliers, giving them opportunities perhaps that they might not otherwise have had. They certainly wouldn't have met the person living in Philadelphia or Los Angeles or wherever. So I think that's an really interesting opportunity. John, can I offer you the last word and ask you guys, you've both been members of the AUHF. We were very happy to offer you this platform here as a discussion because we think that it's interesting to everybody that we know, and we've recorded it, so it will be available more broadly. But what other kinds of things can we do to serve your interests better? We're also learning from you as you build a partnership. You know, we talk about it, but what are the other things that an organization like the African Union for Housing Finance can do to help you guys grow your businesses?
I would say two things. I mean, one is, well, maybe take a step back. AUHF has a lot of very progressive members in the residential and broader real estate sector in Africa. And there's a lot of good minds that are working on interesting things. I personally would love to see more breakout groups that are more targeted to specific industries, meaning, you know, maybe it'd be a forum with someone from Kado and Jobomax and maybe a few other developers. That could be really interesting together, or potentially connecting those individuals with banking institutions and having more of a smaller format introduction. I think that could be really interesting.
Okay.
I'd be curious to hear Bob's perspective on that. The other side of it, which I guess is somewhat similar, is you clearly run across many individuals, both in the public sector as well as larger institutions that have an interest in building these broader ecosystems of housing finance across Africa. And to the extent that we can play a role in knowing what you know about what we're trying to accomplish now, to the extent that you can play a role in introducing us to those parties, I think that would be extremely valuable for us. So, you know, as we continue to, you know, to be a member in AUHF, I think that would be an extremely valuable thing to add, to the extent you can play a role in that.
Okay,
so I don't know, Bob, if
thanks.
you want to add anything to that as well.
No, I agree with everything you said, John. The only other thing that popped into my mind was I think back to how years ago Jobomax got selected for some technical assistance, and we got put into the virtual deal room for Prosper Africa. That sort of led to some conversations, but not really anything interesting. And, you know, given that AUHF, part of the remit is to sort of encourage investment and promote opportunities for investment in the member organizations. You know, yes, breakout groups for people talking about, you know, stuff is one way to connect people that might be investment ready or looking for investments. But you know, if you maybe some sort of deal room that AUHF hosts that shows what opportunities are out there for people to invest in. I think with any organization that is trying to do advocacy and trying to do networking and trying to gather information and share information, you know, there's always a risk that you start to migrate toward things that become sort of talking shops, where, you know, there's a certain amount of value to those kinds of things, because there are forums where people can sort of share information about things that they're doing that people might not see otherwise. But I think those types of networks are kept active and rejuvenated and interesting when in between those sort of talking shop events, you've got like really roll up your sleeves, get your hands dirty. Let's put these few people together that are grappling with the problem X or problem Y, and let them hash it out together and see how they can help each other. So I'm just sort of echoing.
That's useful. That's really cool. I can see how we could start to do some more of that and be more targeted about it. Frank, anything you want to add?
Not particularly. I think John and Bob just touched on the key points, which is maybe more specific collaborations, you know, that will help us maybe like share our thoughts and also network in general, right? Because we're always curious about how things are done, maybe like elsewhere, and who else can maybe help us also and continue to reach our goals. And you know, and I think that, you know, AUHF is like the right sponsor to help analyze that. So
Well, thank you very much to the three of you for coming and talking to all of us here today. And thank you, Thandiwe, for bringing us all together. Very grateful for that. And thank you to everybody in this room for staying and listening. I hope we answered most of your questions. Otherwise, I can see that Bob's put his email address into the chat. Thandiwe's put, in fact, all of your email addresses there. So I'm sure you're open for further conversation and questions and so on. Great. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Keisha. Thank you, Thandiwe. Thank you, AUHF. Thank you, John and Frank.
And good luck.
Thank you. Yeah, well, we need that, right? That's one thing
thank you so
everybody
much, guys.